So we isolate, or we don't, well, we can isolate lots of different kind of directions or modes of breath in holographic breathing. And when we breathe, we perceive the whole body as expanding. Kind of when we breathe, it's like the abdomen's expanding, the chest's expanding. When people think of the cells, it's as if they're expanding. And the reality in that and the driving force in that is a contraction. For the things to expand, there's a contraction to allow that to happen. For instance, in the abdomen, if you think of this as the abdomen, that is the diaphragm, and that is where it's joining to the spine, and that is where it comes into the pelvis and also becomes the pelvic diaphragm. For the abdomen to expand sideways and forwards, it's not like you can just push out. It feels like you're expanding your intestines or something. But what's happening is that the diaphragm is pulling down from above, and also to a certain extent the same thing is happening in the pelvic diaphragm, and the diaphragm is pulling back to the spine. So there's a muscular contraction that causes that expansion. This doesn't just expand on its own. We don't just press that out. To get that feeling, the expansion comes from a compression, top to bottom, and we get an expansion out to the sides and we get an expansion forwards. So the actual primary initiating function is a contraction of the muscles which produce an expansion. And then as these muscles relax, it causes the abdomen to flatten and contract. So breathing in, the muscles actually contracting in the abdomen to produce that feeling of expansion, and it increases. So and we don't feel, I can't feel my diaphragm contracting. That is taken out of our experience. We feel the expansion really easily, as if, that's just my whole abdomen's expanding. But what's the primary driver behind that is a contraction of the muscles. And this is a top to bottom contraction. And this actually mirrors through the whole body in every cell. For a cell to breathe and for the movement, only the lungs fill with actual air. Maybe the sinuses and the nasal passageways and the trachea. The rest of the body, it's not like air can flow into it and it can expand in all directions. So for a cell to breathe, there's a contraction, and then it expands out to the sideways to get that feeling of expansion. There's a contraction top to bottom. And then when we come to the chest, for the ribs to rise, again that is a contraction. The muscles were contracting and that is raising the ribs. So again, there's a contraction of the muscles and the ribs rise. You get this expansion forwards, and at the same time the muscles in the diaphragm are contracting, and that the dome is lessening and that's sinking down. So this whole area is filling with air, and as that is dropping down, it's causing this to expand sideways. And so it's joining together with our previous talk. Then as the ribs are rising, the only thing they can rise to, or if those muscles contract, if it wasn't held by the muscles of the throat, the muscles of the neck, and the muscles connecting to the cranium and face, if it wasn't held by those, the chest would just drop. As those muscles contracted, the chest would just pull downwards if it wasn't held from above. But normally it's held by these muscles, so the chest moves up to the muscles in the neck, which are normally just holding. And in holographic breathing, rather than them just holding, they join in. So this set of muscles from the hyoid bone here, they come down and they join to the top of the sternum, which is rising. So for that to happen, for the sternum to rise, these muscles are shortening. So these muscles shorten, and normally that would just hold, but in holographic breathing you just allow that to move the jaw rather than holding the jaw still and keeping that as a solid thing. The jaw just opens with it and then closes with it. So there's a contraction, opening and closing the jaw from the below, and there's a contraction, equal contraction, coming up to the muscles of the occiput. Otherwise the head would rotate every time you breathe. So it's balanced, forwards to back, breathing in, breathing out. And there's a whole array of muscles coming up to the occiput, coming up to the cranial base, coming to the vertebrae in the neck, and they don't just stop in the vertebrae in the neck, they'll come to the sides of the vertebrae. Then a muscle from the top of that vertebrae will carry on up to the cranium, so it just vectors through the spine, the vertebrae and up, and links to the cranium. And in holographic breathing, rather than that just being set, it all moves. So that contraction and movement is landing in the cranium. It's going through the muscles and landing in the bones of the cranium. And whoever designed it, when that is allowed to happen, the bones of the cranium start to move, and they start to move in a very similar way, or the same way as is talked about in cranial osteopathy or cranial sacral therapy. And it's balancing. So for all of these muscles to be pulling down and in a relaxed way, then the force arrives in the bones, and because it's relaxed and slow with the breath, rather than them being solid, they just open with the in-breath and then close with the out-breath. So there's so that starts happening. In the other ones I just demonstrated how we can look at that. As the jaw drops, it pulls down on the zygomatic arches, which roll out and down on the in-breath and back on the out-breath. This muscle is connecting to the temporal bones and also slightly to the parietal bones. It's rolling out on the in-breath, rolling back in on the out-breath. As it pulls down on the occiput, rolling down on the in-breath, rolling up on the out-breath. And this works through all of the bones of the cranium. And there's an interesting thing. The cranium, again, air isn't coming in to the cranium, so it can't just open in every direction. And you get a similar thing. It is opening to the sides. But for that to allow it to happen, the top is coming down. It's the same as the balloon. Well, not exactly the same as the balloon. That is very similar. It's a bit like happy birthday, there we go. The spine is coming in here. The muscles are pulling the cranium down onto the spine. The spine is lifting into the cranium. That is rotating the occiput down and back. It's rotating the sphenoid forwards, rotating the temporal bones out to the sides. And as that happens, something has to give, and it comes down from above. The top sinks. It's a fixed volume. The sides expand.
But this one,
pardon?
This comes down.
Yeah, the temporal bones, the parietal bones, they do this. As this opens from below, like that, so it's like the bottom is rising and they're coming out sideways. It's doing the same on the top. It's rolling out sideways, and consequently the top comes back. It's different to cranial sacral work that I can remember. As actually, I'm not going to go into that now. That's a whole different topic. I'll go into the actual movements within the bones, because something really different happens in that we will go into later, which changes it from, or gives a completely different explanation to how you learn cranially. But we'll go into that as we learn the different types of breath. Now, if you just visualize the jaw, you can, once you know that the jaw is actually swinging, it's hard to visualize it as just moving up and down. But if you have the visualization as up and down, it's pulling down through the face. But once it's rotating, then it starts rotating the maxilla down and a little bit back. And all of the bones of the face, they all follow. They all start rotating around the TMJs. Now the TMJs, if you take a line between the TMJs, it hits exactly where the occiput is joining to the base of the sphenoid. It's exactly the same line. So as it's rotating around the TMJs there, it's rotating between the occiput and the sphenoid bone. The occiput, as it's rolling down, the base of the occiput, because it's sitting on the spine here, so this will be dropping, that will be rising slightly there, but the sphenoid is rolling down, so where they join, it's kind of doing that, which also becomes a fulcrum. You've got the fulcrum that it's sitting on the spine, but also you've got a fulcrum where it's joining to the sphenoid, which is exactly, you've got this line straight through the TMJs. So also, as I mentioned before, it's not just these muscles that are stretching when the jaw is coming down. I don't know the names of this muscle, but the pterygoid plates or the pterygoid plates or whatever they're called, you've got a strong muscle into there to the back edge of the jaw. So that is also being torsioned in the same way as these are being torsioned, and that pulls the legs of the sphenoid back, and then the whole body of the sphenoid is rolling down and forwards with it. So you get this rotation in that bone there. What are the major set of muscles joins the jaw and the hyoid bone to the face and a bit to the cranium? Major set of muscles.
Scalenes.
Talked about it earlier. Joins the hyoid bone and the jaw, mainly to the maxilla. Hidden in plain view, the same as the jaw actually moves backwards, hidden in plain view, the main muscle that joins the hyoid bone and the jaw to the maxilla is the tongue. Not normally, but in holographic breathing, as I've been teaching, the whole tongue relaxes and comes onto the roof of the mouth and makes a seal. So you can, if you put your whole tongue on the roof of the mouth and it's sealed, notice you can really pull down hard and it stays attached to the roof of the mouth. It's as if it's attached. It's the same thing as being attached. Now in holographic breathing it's relaxed and it's still a suction bladder, so it's as if the tongue, which is a muscle, is attached to the roof of the mouth. So as the jaw and the hyoid bone drop down, that is also very subtly pulling the whole maxilla down, rotating it back. With the jaw is rotating back, then the maxilla is rotating back. Now, one of the reasons I think this inspires, at least for me, and I think as you carry on you'll feel a deeper and deeper breath, is that as this rotates, and then one you connect to these muscles that are connecting to the legs of the sphenoid, which rotate the sphenoid but also the maxilla down and forwards. The tongue is rotating it down and forwards. The maxilla is the lungs and heart in holographic breathing. The maxillary sinuses, I haven't got an anatomy book here, but they look like a pair of lungs. Nasal passageways in the middle looks a bit like the heart, and the roof of the mouth is the same dome as the diaphragm. It's like the chest, and the mouth is the abdomen, and the jaw is the pelvis. So it initiates the movement in the centre of the face, which is to do with the lungs, and then it pulls down through the eyes, through the maxilla, and you get this rotation down. It starts the movement, and as that is rotating down this way, then you start having to, people started feeling, or I think you did, started feeling your occiput, because you need to combine it to that feeling of the occiput rotating as well, to balance, because the spine is pushing up in between, or this is pulling down onto the spine and these are rotating around it. So it becomes a bit like a fan opening back and forth in a vertical plane through the body. It's not only is it doing this and this, it's opening like a fan front to back. And quite often also when people are doing quite often people have got their heads back, but if it's balanced, the head is forwards, this is down. But people, or at least with myself, I experience the jaw as kind of being level with the occiput, which it isn't. Jaw is much lower than the occiput. The roof of the mouth is more level with the occiput, but we don't generally, or I don't, maybe other people do, I don't generally experience the jaws being that much lower than the occiput. And it's kind of easy to experience it like a fan. That's dropping down that way, this is dropping that way, and this is all fanning out. But I don't see it as that. With the brain, to do it this way around so people can see, you've got the centre of the thalamus somewhere around here, and then that drops down into the brain stem in the middle, and you've got the pons there. And then, so for me, with the brain, it starts in the thalamus, it comes down, you've got the pons, then that comes back to the cerebellum, which is a bit larger, and then that comes to the cerebrum, which is bigger. Again, for me, it's like a spiral. It's like these pictures of snails where the snail is spiraling. And the same with the bones. It's a bit like the temporal bones are sitting down pretty well centrally into the TMJs, and then this rotates into the occiput, which is a bit bigger. That rotates into the parietal bones, which is spiral. That's starting to move down into the frontal bone, then that comes down through the face, and it's a bit like a snail, and the opening of the snail is here. These pictures of the golden mean opening around these seashells, you say. For me, it's the same with the cranium, that it makes that spiral, and the jaw is the very last part of it. So as this, and if you think of, maybe even think of it a bit like a hermit crab or something, and the hermit crab is here. As the jaw is opening, it's a bit like the hermit crab's coming out a bit from the shell. So it's a rotation through the bones and a rotation to the back. And this is a bit like, it's closer to the middle of the shell, so it's more stable and holds. And then this is rolling towards it. So as soon as we... Are you all right there? Is this getting a bit too much? Or most people have learned lots of anatomy, so just let it run through you. You don't have to remember any of this. You don't have to remember the names of the bones. It's nice to get a picture that it looks like a snail. That's all you really need, is that it looks like a snail. So rather than a fan opening, it's this spiral getting bigger and bigger as it comes round. And also to realise that when we name bones, like as part of the cranium, that the frontal bone is a bone of the cranium. Well, not so. The underside of the eyes, the sides of the eye sockets, these are also the frontal bone, which is part of the face. The greater wings of the sphenoid are the backs of the eyes, and also a bit the sides of the eyes, which is part of the face. The ethmoid bone is the inside face of the eyes. There's a little bit of the ethmoid bone part of the cranium there, but it drops down right into the nose, so it's part of the face, so that joins into the face. And the legs of the sphenoid, the perioid plates, are joining into the back of the maxilla and the maxillary sinuses there. So it's all joining, and then as this rotates, it all starts to work, and you get this whole rotation. So we're going to go through it very quickly, and then we'll just expand into this next time. We'll take it much deeper, and we'll drop into feeling the jaw as a rotation, as we've started doing. What I think I'll do is we'll do that for a little tiny bit, and then just notice what that feels, because what happens, one of the things for me that I notice what happens is when I have that as a circle, my whole throat relaxes. Whereas when you do a lot of holographic breathing, this can come a little bit tight. You really have to learn how to relax that area with it, which I do, and it's okay. But when this is rotating backwards, that automatically completely relaxes. And when that's rotating, suddenly it makes it free for the chest to move upwards. So we'll just look at those two things, and people may notice that or may not. It may just be me noticing that. And then we'll work with it for a little bit and get this longitudinal breath through the whole body. We'll notice that. We'll just get a sense of that. So for the chest to expand, for the abdomen to expand, for the cranium to expand, through the whole body, there's a contraction top to bottom. And so there is this contraction, but what that does is it increases the expansion. Suddenly, for me, this is one of the reasons you breathe much more deeply when you start seeing it as a circle, is that it interfaces with this up-down motion through that, not just through the spine and the abdomen and the cranium, but you start feeling it in every cell. You can feel the legs and arms shortening on the in-breath and lengthening on the out. At least I can. But I think that you felt it when we did the womb, didn't you?
Yeah. On the in-breath, I feel an expansion and the squashing.
Yeah.
And then on the out-breath, I feel like a coming in and a lengthening.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
That's what we're...
like that.
Brilliant. So we'll start encouraging that, and then if we get time, we'll start taking it into this spiral type shape of the cranium.